Joining me now is Andy Freedman. He is the founder of Miles for Migrants. Andy, welcome back to the Young Turks.
Thanks for having me again. It's good to see you.
No problem. So I interviewed Andy about a year ago. I want to talk about the updates since then because they've been amazing. But first, for the folks that don't know, what is Miles for Migrants?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Miles for Migrants is an organization that's been around about 3 years. Our mission is pretty simple. We use donated miles and money for the purposes of relocation of those displaced by war, persecution, politics, and more. Since launching, and we can talk about the numbers, but we've been very fortunate to be able to help over 1,100 individuals find that new home and be reunited with family.
So I want to talk about some of those stories because they're really powerful. But give us an example here of how it would work, right? Sure. So now from both ends, how do people give you the miles and then how do you use the miles?
Yeah, great question. So giving the miles is very simple. You visit our website, milesformigrants.org. You donate whatever increment of miles for whatever program you have to give. The requirement is that you're able to give at least enough to book a one-way flight. So in the US, a domestic flight typically starts around 12,500 miles on the domestic airlines. So you could start there or go up. And that single 12,500 mile can reunite a father with their wife and children. And so that's where it starts. You kind of pledge your miles. And then when we find a match, a case that's brought to us from one of our partners that fits the miles that you gave us, that's when you next get contacted and we pull you in and you're very involved in the actual booking of that flight and helping the reunification happen.
Okay, and we're seeing some video here of your reunification of family, and it's just powerful to look at. So, all right, well, give us a specific example of someone that you reunited, and so people can get a sense of what you mean in terms of refugees or who you help, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah, so when we last spoke a year ago, most of our work to date had been in cases of international refugee reunification. A lot of that was because that is the partnerships that we're able to identify early. But over the past year, mainly driven by everything that's been happening at our own border, there has been a swell of grassroots and large refugee aid organizations in the US who have partnered with us. Those include organizations like Catholic Charities, HIAS, IRC, and they're the ones working at the border, identifying and helping people when they're out of a detention facility that need to get back to their family. And so a case that really touched us a few weeks ago, you may have seen it in the news, was a story of a 3-year-old girl who was with her family on the border, and she was having medical issues, heart challenges, and the U.S. government was looking to deport her, but the medical staff at the facility was able to convince ICE that she needed to stay, but on the condition that only one parent could stay with that daughter, with that child. I have a 3-year-old myself, and so picturing a 3-year-old girl having to choose between mom and dad who would stay with her is heartbreaking enough. Luckily, the doctors and the staff on the ground were able to convince ICE to let the whole family stay with the child. And at that point, we were brought in to help fly the entire family to Indiana, where they were able to get the medical treatment and be with family in the US to keep them safely.
See, Andy, that's really interesting because I don't think anybody ever thinks about that. So if they're here and they don't have any money and they need to get to Indiana to treat the 3-year-old, how are they going to get there? If it wasn't for your
Greyhound.
group, yeah, they'd have to get in a Greyhound and somehow scrounge up the money for a Greyhound, and they have to take that incredibly long trip on the bus, hope that the kid's okay and makes it to safety.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. Okay, but you do this in international cases too. Like there's a kid from Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
So tell us that story because I want to ask about what he would do if it wasn't for you guys.
Yeah, and so all these cases. So there's many of these stories. One recent story was someone who was recruited in their school was taken over by militants, and they were trying to convince people to join their regime. Their family fought to smuggle the child out of the country, who was able to seek refuge in Europe. 3 years later, the child was able to file for status as a asylee and bring the rest of the family over. And when you're in that situation, this is a child. They have no money, they have no job, they have the support of kind of the people who have been aiding them on the ground in the country that they've found a new home. But finding the money to fly another 3, 4, 5 people from the Middle East or Africa to Europe is a huge cost. So again, that's where our organization comes in, and we're able to remove that financial burden, and all through the donations of good-hearted Samaritans who have said, we have extra miles and we want to put them to good use.
So we're going to put the link down below for milesformigrants.org. If you're watching this later on YouTube and Facebook, make it really easy for you guys to just click on there and help out. So it doesn't cost you any money, at least, and God, it'll make you feel great. Because when you think about the story that Andy just told, and I literally don't know what they do, Andy. Because they finally get accepted into the new country, and a lot of times their lives are in danger and they got to go. But they don't have money for a plane ticket for one person, let alone 4 or 5 people. How the hell would they get that money? But I'm asking a literal question. If it wasn't for Miles for Migrants, do they get stuck there for years trying to figure out how to actually pay the flight?
And often there's a time limit. These visa limits are usually fixed, whether they be a few months or slightly longer. And so if they don't get to their new home in that window, they have to start the whole process again. Sometimes they're able to raise money through their community. These typically aren't people who are able to access a lot of the crowdfunding platforms that are out there. Sometimes they can, but typically they're in a very difficult situation. And honestly, that's the reason that our founders came together to form Miles for Migrants, is we saw the same thing that you're wondering, like, what would happen? Why isn't there a solution? And we looked around, we didn't find one, so we decided to build it ourselves.
Andy, do you do this? You don't do this full time, do you?
No, you're actually, I work at an early stage technology company. My 2 other founders both also have gainful employment. We do this as volunteers. We have very patient, loving wives who put up with it when we're putting in the late nights. And we also all have young children ourselves. So that's really what motivates us, is picturing our own families being in these types of situations.
Yeah, that's just wonderful. So let's talk about what's happened in the last year, because I remember when we talked to you, you guys were a burgeoning group, just kind of getting started, and then there was this viral moment, and then so I'm curious, for the people who don't remember what the viral moment is, let them know, and then what happened afterwards.
Yeah, so actually it was a year ago on Tuesday. So we just celebrated what we've been calling our viral-versary. And it all started with the University of Michigan law professor, Beth Walensky, who herself was seeing what was happening at the US border and donated miles to help reunite a family, and posted about that online. Tagged us as a way that others could give. And really that just struck a chord with people. And it led to over 38 million miles were donated to us in a 3-week time span. So that obviously threw us a little bit. We had a lot more miles to use, but the past 365 days has been truly dedicated to doing a few things. One, building out our partner organization to find more people to help. So I mentioned some of those organizations, like HIAS and IRC. There's also a lot of grassroots amazing organizations in the US, like Immigrant Families Together, and to get many others that have been able to refer us cases and grow that network. So we went from having a handful of partners to now we have 20 active partners who are referring us cases on a daily basis. You're seeing some of the stats here of what we've been able to do with those miles. Over 1,000 people. So when we last spoke to you, I think we were closing in on our 100th flight. So you can imagine how busy the last year has been.
10x in 1 year, that's amazing. That's 1,000 people who could have been stranded where they are, some of them in actual danger. It's just, it's great to get good news from time to time in a world filled, unfortunately, with bad news, especially recently. So give us one more story. Every one of them is compelling, but I read this story of the man in Congo that was part of a nonviolent protest. I don't know if you remember all of these or not.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so can you tell us about that?
We see several cases like this. So people who are exercising their own kind of freedom of speech, but in places where they don't have that freedom, are persecuted. And so those are often the cases where we're able to support. That particular case was somehow able to make it through Central America to the U.S. border, and pleaded for asylum. And we were able to help that individual make it to a family in Maine, of all places. But that's where they are. So when they have traveled really the world, made it to the U.S. seeking the American dream and looking for a better way and a better life and a place to vocalize their freedom of speech, being able to step in and kind of do that last mile, if you will, is very powerful, and that's another great story that keeps us motivated. So just to touch on that, I think when we last spoke, it was really just the founding team that was working on this. But as a result of a lot of the media and people finding out about our organization, our volunteer network has grown tremendously. So we now have over 25 active volunteers who are also putting in their nights and weekends, and we're now in the process of really trying to take the next level of growing and bringing on full-time staff. So very excited about the future for our young organization.
Right, and that guy in Cairo, by the way, is attacked by state security forces. So that's another situation where you got to get him out, and you got to get him out as quickly as you can. An incredibly brave guy. So we'll make this non-political. Donald Trump complained in the beginning that, as an example, Mexico wasn't sending us their best. Well, don't worry, Andy's on the job. Miles for Migrants are on the job. They're sending us the best.
And we agree. And I think that's another thing that really is motivating. You showed one of the videos of a family that we were able to reunite, and that happens constantly. So we typically get a photo or a video of that moment of reunification, and waking up in the morning and seeing a picture of a father who is seeing their son for the first time in years. It makes you cry, but it also, more importantly, motivates us to keep going.
Yeah, well, it almost made me cry both times. Okay, so we got to go. Miles for migrants.org, Andy Freedman, doing God's work. Thank you, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.